Janet and I have been married for 12 years and have been in a relationship since we were 10 years old. I was not interested in pursuing a college education, so I began working at Desmond Engineering as a draftsman at the bottom rung shortly after graduating from high school. Janet and I welcomed twin girls, Bethany and Brittany, who made us extremely proud parents. The initial years were challenging. However, by exercising caution in our financial management, we were able to maintain a satisfactory standard of living. I continued to work as a draftsman, but had advanced to a more senior position, which resulted in a modest increase in income. Despite the limited resources, we were able to accumulate sufficient funds to purchase a modest residence and maintain 2 dependable vehicles. While these vehicles were not brand new, they were far from being substandard. Janet had always aspired to be a stay-at-home mother. At this juncture, it is necessary to pause and reflect on the circumstances that have led to this point in time. Janet was a homemaker and, since our financial circumstances allowed, she did not engage in external employment. This arrangement proved satisfactory for us. We were both in good health and physical condition. Janet had gained a modest amount of weight since our wedding day, but not significantly. She was of slight build, approximately 5 foot tall, with dark brown hair styled with bangs, reminiscent of Marie Osmond. I retained a similar physical appearance to when I played right tackle in high school football. I was large but not overweight. Billy Martin, a former football rival, relocated to Reading from Lancaster approximately a year ago and began while employed at Desmond Engineering as a surveyor. Billy and I rapidly established a close friendship. He also married his high school sweetheart, Sarah, a woman with red hair. Sarah and Janet quickly became close friends. Billy and Sarah had not yet started a family, but they were highly competent at caring for children. Billy and I would socialize together when we were not working, enjoying time apart from our spouses. Janet and Sarah did the same, spending their time shopping, attending parties, and going to club meetings, while Billy and I took care of the children. Furthermore, Sarah obtained a position as a secretary at Gilbert Engineering, a company located in close proximity to our town, approximately 6 months ago. I began to observe notable changes in their behavior. Parent-teacher association meetings, which previously occurred on a monthly basis, became weekly events. Despite Sarah not having children, she consistently accompanied Janet. The frequency of Tupperware and Magic Chef parties they attended seemed to increase on a monthly basis, yet they never made any purchases. They also joined a book club but rarely read any books on weekends. They spent considerable time shopping but rarely returned with any purchases. Meanwhile, Janet's collection of intimate apparel was becoming more extensive. However, I never observed any of these items. These observations began to cause me concern, but I kept them to myself because Billy seemed unaware and I was reluctant to cause unnecessary difficulties. One evening after I had put our daughters to bed, Janet returned from a shopping trip. She had showered before leaving with Sarah and again immediately after returning home. This struck me as odd. While Janet was showering, I decided to look through the laundry and found a pair of black lace underwear prompted me to consider who would wear such an item to a basket party. Typically, I would not consider examining my wife's undergarments, but that evening, curiosity prevailed, and I observed that they were damp and sticky. I placed them in my pocket. I had previously never rummaged through my wife's purse or wallet, but that night, I felt compelled to do so, particularly her cell phone. It appeared that she had not anticipated my inspection, as her call history from the previous week remained intact. The majority of calls were to Sarah, but they also included several other individuals. From the numbers labeled KC, KH and kilowatt, it was initially unclear who these were. However, it was deduced that C stood for sale, H for home and W probably for work in Sarah's address book. Sarah's numbers were listed similarly, with Sarah C, Sarah H and Sarah W. This demonstrated how organized Sarah kept her contacts. Sarah's work number included an extension, and when it was compared to the kilowatt number, it matched Sarah's, but with a different extension. This indicated that Janet had been in touch with someone at Sarah's workplace and that Sarah had probably introduced them with Gilbert. I decided to use Janet's phone to dial the kilowatt number. The voicemail of Kinsanders greeted me, explaining that he was away from his desk but would return calls if I left my details. I quickly hung up after the message, as it seemed too straightforward. Since Gilbert Engineering was closed, I used Janet's phone to dial the kilowatt number and reached Kinsander's voicemail. I quickly hung up after hearing the message to leave a contact detail for a call back. This felt too simple. Janet then asked if I was heading to bed soon. I told her I might complete my book or simply fall asleep on the couch. Despite my initial intention to remain awake all night, the evening proved to be one of restlessness as I contemplated potential errors or alternative courses of action. Realizing that the situation was inherently futile, despite my efforts to focus on the future, my mind repeatedly returned to past actions. The clock seemed to stand still, and I decided not to blame myself for any actions that might occur in the morning. I awoke to the sound of our daughter preparing breakfast. Janet's encouragement had proven effective as I arose, and Janet reminded me of my work obligations. I informed her that I would not be attending due to personal issues, surprising her since I rarely missed a day due to exhaustion. I mentioned needing a shower, leaving Janet looking somewhat perplexed by the time I returned. Upon my return, the girls had already departed for school. I procured a coffee and took a seat opposite my wife at the table. She glanced up at me, seemingly expecting something, yet uncertain of what it might be. I decided to address the matter directly. I inquired about the extramarital affair she was engaged in. I was not in the mood for subtlety, and I was uncertain as to whether she would simply come clean. "John, is that why you have been so despondent? Do you truly believe that I am having an affair?" she inquired. I replied in the affirmative. "Let us discuss your affair," I pressed. "We have been together for 12 years, she countered. "Why would you think that?" she questioned. "I am busy today and I do not wish to waste time playing games," I replied. Wasting time playing games is unproductive. It is therefore necessary to ask Janet about the affair. Janet sighed heavily and leaned in. "John, you are imagining things. There is no affair." "I would like to believe you, but I cannot," I responded with a degree of skepticism regarding her denial. Janet leaned back and sipped her coffee. She did so with a degree of confidence. "What do you want to ask me?" "John, why do you claim to?" I inquired as to why she had been attending PDA meetings on a weekly basis, despite the PDA secretary stating that they were only held on a monthly basis. I observed a wavering in her confidence. She attempted to reassure me, but I pressed further, asking her to explain why she and Sarah claimed to attend these PDA meetings every Tuesday. After a brief pause, Janet admitted that Tuesday is ladies' night at Rosie's Cantina and that Sarah and she had gone for the 2-for-1 margaritas. They did not want to cause any trouble for John and Billy, so they kept it to themselves. Janet admitted that it was a mistake and apologized for it. She promised that they would be more open in future. "Janet, I will verify the veracity of your account. I am confident that Sarah will corroborate your assertion, but I am curious about the perspective of the staff at Rosie's." "John, you are making a greater issue of this than is necessary. Why do you shower before and after these events? Why do you remove the odors only when you return?" He was initially reluctant to respond, citing the prevalence of smoking among women and his own aversion to the lingering odors. He also expressed reservations about the choice of attire for Tupperware parties, noting that such formal wear is not typically worn outside of special occasions. He inquired as to the rationale behind this discrepancy. While he acknowledged a personal preference for feeling fancy when going out, he was unable to provide a clear justification. I was becoming increasingly exasperated by her evasions. I was unable to contain my anger any longer. "These are the underwear you wore last night," I stated. "These are the underwear you wore last night. They were damp and sticky when you got home. Do not even attempt to excuse it as something trivial." Janet appeared uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. To respond promptly, I inquired as to why Janet had returned home in such a state of undress. I demanded a clear and concise answer. "John, I am unable to continue bearing this burden. We have been married for 12 years, yet I am still unable to comprehend your actions. Your continuous denials and lies have become overwhelming." I threw my coffee cup, breaking the microwave. Her attention was suddenly drawn to me, and I observed an expression I had never seen before. She had never witnessed me this angry. I leaned forward, making sure I had her full attention, and raised my voice to a level that was more than usual. "Who is Ken Sanders?" she asked, her voice trembling. She quickly stood up and retreated to the sink, attempting to distance herself from me for the last time. "Who is Ken Sanders?" I repeated, my voice also trembling. I demanded to know if she was Ken Sanders. She replied in a visibly terrified manner, stating that she was. I then asked her if she had slept with him. She confirmed that she had. I then asked her if it had occurred last night. She confirmed that it had. I then asked her to confirm that she was sorry. She pleaded with me to stop, stating that she was sorry. She then began to cry, and I saw her tears streaming down her face as she stood by the sink. I then grabbed a cup. I proceeded to pour myself a new coffee and was about to sit when Janet's phone rang. Her gaze flickered between the phone and me in panic. I informed her that it was Ken and that we should answer it. I then pressed the speakerphone button. The voice on the other end of the line greeted me with, "Good morning, sugar. I saw you called my work number last night. Did you forget something at my place?" Ken Sanders came through. Janet appeared horrified, and after a brief silence, she responded, "What's wrong?" He inquired. She glanced at me, seemingly frozen. I urged her to speak, and Ken, my husband, was listening on speakerphone. She managed to say, "Ken didn't respond or hang up." I then addressed Ken, suggesting that he might want to be prepared for emergencies. I hung up, pocketed the phone, and looked at Janet, who was still by the sink in her bathrobe, shaking uncontrollably. I needed to leave, and I asked her one more question: "Who's the guy Sarah's involved with?" I informed him that I would be returning later and suggested that he might want to be prepared for emergencies. I terminated the call, pocketed the phone and looked at Janet, who was still by the sink in her bathrobe, shaking uncontrollably. I informed her that I needed to leave. I then asked her one final question: "Who is the man Sarah is involved with?" "Please, John, I don't want to say," she pleaded, her frustration evident. I threw another cup across the room, where it shattered against the wall. Startled, she quickly said, "Calvin Bostic. I'll be back later. Make sure you've moved out by then. My mother will look after our daughters until we figure out what to do next. If it doesn't fit in your car, I'll make sure it gets to you. Just tell my mother where you're going. Don't try to contact me." She was silent as I departed, uncertain of my subsequent actions. I elected to visit Billy at his place of employment, believing he was entitled to be apprised of the developments. It appeared that Sarah and Calvin had become close through their shared work environment, and Ken was likely Calvin's associate who had become acquainted with Janet. This hypothesis, while perhaps simplistic, seemed to align with the circumstances. Billy was not present at the office, so I contacted him. "Billy, I have some unfortunate news." "Is anyone injured?" he inquired, sounding distressed. "The situation is rather chaotic. Janet and Sarah have been neglecting their responsibilities by engaging in romantic relationships with other individuals instead of attending the scheduled meetings and social gatherings." I informed Billy that he initially expressed skepticism. "I do not believe this account. John's narrative appears implausible." I suggested that he inquire with Sarah about her relationship with Colleen Bostic, a colleague at her workplace. This could potentially lead to the discovery that Janet had introduced her to Ken Sanders, another colleague. I informed Billy that I recognized the names and warned him that Janet would likely inform Sarah of his involvement. He should therefore take appropriate action. I anticipated that Janet would provide similar excuses. Billy terminated the call and I proceeded to the Human Resources Department to request time off. I was disinclined to work and was prompt in transferring my ongoing projects to another draftsman. Janet's phone rang, displaying Sarah's caller ID. "Janet, I am unsure of the circumstances. Billy has just called me and I believe he has arrived at the office. I surmise that he may have overheard something Sarah said." I remained silent. "Janet, this is not an appropriate time for levity." She persisted. "Good morning, Sarah. This is John. I am currently using Janet's phone as mine is out of battery. What is the latest news?" I couldn't resist adding a bit of spice to the situation. "Oh, John, I'm sorry. I thought this was Janet. I'll try her at home." Sarah said, somewhat flustered, that she thought I was calling Janet. She said she was busy packing up her things and that she didn't have time to talk. I informed her that I had heard that she was moving back with her parents for a while. I explained the situation to her. Silence on her end was indicative of a lack of response. I proposed that perhaps it would be advisable to inform Calvin that Billy was aware of the situation and was on his way. It might be beneficial to provide him with a heads up. However, this was not the case. Sarah suddenly terminated the call, displaying a lack of composure. I was astonished by her audacity in cancelling our only credit card. This was a straightforward process, and changing the PIN for our ATM debit card only required a few minutes. However, I was uncertain about how to proceed with our joint checking account. Therefore, I decided to leave the matter in abeyance for the time being, as I required access to the account in order to settle my utility bills and other outstanding payments. I was relieved to learn that Janet had not taken any checks with her. My mobile phone rang, but this time it was Billy, who informed me that he had confronted Calvin Bosk at Gilbert Engineering. Calvin had been apprehended in the parking lot and subsequently incarcerated. Billy requested that I contact his brother in Lancaster to arrange for his release. However, I was unable to provide further assistance. I proceeded to assist Billy in any way I could. I subsequently visited my parents and informed them of the situation. My mother agreed to assist with the girls staying at my house during the week and having the twins over on weekends. I then decided to pay a visit to Kinsanders, the drafting team at Gilbert. They were eager to share the morning drama from their vantage point. They had witnessed Billy tackling Calvin before he could get to his BMW and then pinning him. He was then seen to be grappling with Calvin, who was subsequently hit by a car and injured. Security personnel attempted to intervene, but were unable to do so effectively. They resorted to using a taser on Billy, who was then taken into custody. Calvin was also taken into custody and required medical attention. I subsequently learned where Kinsanders' cubicle was, but it was empty. It appeared that he had left that morning. Sarah's desk was also untouched, suggesting that she was still working there. I then discovered Kin's home address and was on my way there. I found the residence was a small ranch-style house with a white Lexus parked outside. The trunk and doors were open as I approached. Kin came out with a load of clothes but dropped everything and ran back inside upon seeing me. I chased after him but tripped over the clothes only to see him escaping out the back. I couldn't help but laugh at his panicked reaction. I decided not to worry about the checking account right then since I needed it to pay the bills anyway. I was concerned that Janet might have taken any checks with her. My mobile phone rang, and this time it was a call for me. Billy had confronted Calvin Bosk at Gilbert Engineering and ended up getting him arrested in the parking lot. He asked me to contact Calvin's brother in Lancaster to bail him out after making the call. There wasn't much else I could do to help Billy, so I grabbed lunch at Taco Bell. Later, I visited my parents and filled them in on the situation. My mother agreed to assist with the girls during this transition. She would reside at my place during the week, and the twins would spend weekends with them. I then wished to ascertain the whereabouts of Kinsanders. The drafting team at Gilbert had a clear view of the parking lot and had observed Billy's confrontation with Calvin. They informed me that Billy had physically subdued Calvin until security intervened with a taser. They also mentioned that Kinsanders had unexpectedly terminated his employment that morning, yet Sarah was still listed as an employee on the company records. I was able to ascertain his residential address and proceeded to visit him at his home. The property appeared to be rented and was scheduled for imminent vacating. I had hoped to engage in conversation with Kin, but I did not intend to pursue the matter further by entering the premises. I discovered his cellular telephone, passport, and personal documents on a desk, along with a laptop computer on the dining table. I collected these items and departed, taking care to avoid any actions that could be perceived as criminal. Despite my criminal nature, I was unable to resist the temptation to cause mischief by deflating one of his car tires. I proceeded to the jail to see Billy, but he was otherwise engaged with legal matters. I therefore merely greeted him and took my leave. My mother was already engaged in preparing dinner. I transported Ken's belongings to my den, but my daughter's return from school preceded my opportunity to explain the situation. Bethany inquired about their grandmother's presence and their mother's whereabouts. I was compelled to. I simplified the situation by informing them that their mother and I were temporarily separated. Their mother was going to stay with her grandparents for a while. Brittany smiled, while Beth merely sighed. I could tell that I was correct. Brittany was clearly proud of her prediction, while Beth looked annoyed. I asked, perplexed, what is the joke here? I surmised that their mother was being unfaithful, and Beth seemed to think that was. It would appear that I have emerged victorious. I did not explicitly state that their mother was unfaithful. I sought to clarify that their father and I were not naive and implored him not to treat us as such. It is evident that their mother is engaging in infidelity. Brittany interjected, stating that their mother was indeed unfaithful. I was taken aback by this revelation. Their father, I felt, was somewhat trusting. Brittany, for her part, attempted to console me, placing her arms around me in a gesture that seemed somewhat out of character for a 12-year-old. 1 year the previous evening, Sarah informed her mother and I that they were going on an adults-only shopping trip and would not be returning later. Some students at my school claimed to have seen her with another man and even produced a photograph to substantiate their claim. Brittany then proceeded to explain why she had not informed me of this earlier. I was taken aback by her response and asked her why she had not told me sooner. She and her mother simply shrugged their shoulders. A few weeks later, Tracy Mercer's parents observed Sarah and a group of men at a restaurant. The restaurant was the setting for the revelation. Tracy was speechless, just in time for dinner to be called. We did not discuss the matter during the meal, and I excused myself early. Fortunately, the twins did not bring it up again that night, allowing me a much-needed respite from the topic. I began to explore Kin's laptop and his cell phone received a text message. It read, "DK is free, sorry for the mess. I am fond of Janet." I am not proficient in text messaging, but this message was unambiguous. It originated from Sarah's phone, indicating that Sarah and Janet were in communication. I replied with TJ, thanking John for letting me know that I had access to Kin's phone. I spent several hours going through Kin's computer, but I did not find any emails between Janet and Kin. However, I did discover some intriguing emails between Kin and his former friends in Lancaster. Despite Janet's long-standing relationship with the author, the discovery was a profound shock. It appeared that Janet had developed a closer bond with Kin in a relatively short period of time than with the author over the course of 2 decades. At one point, while changing a printer cartridge, the author realized that he was crying. This was an unusual occurrence for him, as Janet's betrayal had caused him significant emotional distress. The author printed several emails and photos, but was limited by the amount of special paper he had available. The images were of an appropriate nature, with no indications of impropriety. Beth then requested to call her mother, which I could not deny. While my mother was with Beth and Britt, Janet was engaged in conversation with them. Janet ended up hearing the entire conversation, although she was not attempting to eavesdrop. The twins were not being particularly discreet. My mother later informed me that the girls were the conversation with Janet was relatively straightforward, with the latter holding the former responsible for the issues that had arisen. The discussion was brief, lasting less than 5 minutes. The emails revealed some details that were particularly interesting. Kin had secured a position as an engineer on a renewable energy project in Spain and was scheduled to start in 6 weeks. It appeared that he had not informed his current employer, Gilbert, about his departure. This information might have been known to Sarah, but it was not clear whether she had been informed. It appeared that he had not informed anyone at the company of his intended departure, with the exception of Sarah. It was therefore necessary for him to obtain a new passport in order to meet his start date. However, given the circumstances, it was unlikely that he would report the passport stolen to the police. Furthermore, he had not yet booked his flight. One email to a friend revealed that Janet was planning to take this matter further. When she relocated to Spain with her relatives, she presumed that I would not permit her to take the twins abroad and planned to have me declared an unfit father in order to prevent me from having visitation or custody. Ken wrote the email, so his word was the only evidence. However, I wished I had something directly from Janet. I printed several copies of this email for safekeeping. My mother dozed off while watching late-night television, so I suggested that she retire for the night. The girls were already asleep, so I retired to the couch, surrounded by empty beer bottles. The next morning, the aroma of fresh coffee and bacon woke me. My mother always made a great breakfast, and the girls were nearly done with their cereal when I joined them at the table. I braced myself for their playful teasing before I could even think about addressing the situation with my soon-to-be ex-wife. Prior to the girls' departure for the bus, I proceeded to inform them that their mother might attempt to disinherit me from their lives by labeling me as an unfit parent, with the intention of retaining sole custody. I reassured them that I was amenable to shared custody, as their happiness was of paramount importance to me. However, I made it clear that I would not concede to any such demands. I did not relinquish my right to be a part of their lives. I did not want them to feel torn, but it was important that they knew the truth. I urged them to remain vigilant and ignore any falsehoods. I informed them that their father was more perceptive than he realized and that he should not be unduly concerned. I reassured them that they loved their mother but that they would not allow her to harm them or him. Brittany was smiling and Beth gave a supportive thumbs up as they departed. My mother refilled my coffee and joined me, reassuring me that I had everyone's support. I had gotten ready and dressed in a more formal manner than usual. I felt somewhat uncomfortable carrying 3 cell phones, and I reminded myself to buy a charger for Ken's phone. I would have preferred to be over-prepared at the family services office. I felt somewhat awkward when I was called by a caseworker I recognized from high school, Jod Mitchell. She was known for her distinct style. Despite our different high school circles, where goths were often isolated, Jod appeared to be an ordinary individual at the time, although I still recalled her for her distinctive hairstyle, black lipstick and heavy makeup. Back then, our thoughts were often misinterpreted, leaving us to speculate about her true interests. It is likely that the wild rumors about her were not true, but at the time, we tended to believe the most sensational stories. The name J. Mitchell on her desk led me to believe that she had not married. This made sense to me 12 years ago, but upon closer examination, she seemed to have changed significantly. I stuttered a bit, and she looked great. I managed to say something, which made her laugh at my clumsiness. She asked if I meant that, compared to my goth days, I now seemed awkward. I reassured her that I did not mean it in a bad way. I tried to clarify, and she reassured me, explaining that by mid-college, she had realized she did not need to hide behind a goth facade and had been living as her true self for nearly a decade. I apologized for sounding condescending and admitted that I often say the wrong thing. She brushed it off, eager to get to the reason for my visit. I asked if she had any files on me till she came to realize that she no longer needed to hide behind a goth facade and had been living as her true self for nearly a decade. I apologized for sounding condescending and admitted that I often say the wrong thing. Jod brushed it off and was eager to get to the reason for my visit. I asked if she had any files on me till she promptly conducted a search and confirmed that no files existed under my or Janet's names. She joked that it seemed we were nourishing our children and not causing them harm. She confirmed that we had twin daughters, Bethany and Brittany, aged 12. I finally explained my situation. My wife planned to leave me and take our daughters. Jod was not surprised, noting that such situations were common in her line of work. I asked whether a mother would typically bring proof or documentation to support her claim. Jod confirmed that there was nothing in their records. At this time, there are records against me. Therefore, I am uncertain as to whether you are attempting to set me up. It is possible that she has not yet reported anything, but is gathering evidence, such as medical records or police reports. I considered the possibility that the absence of records does not prove my innocence. It seems that you are suggesting that I was in a quandary, unsure of the best course of action. Jod was reassuring, suggesting that my situation was not as dire as I had initially perceived. I inquired as to why I had assumed my wife would take such actions, and Jod explained that she had not necessarily intended to deceive me. I then showed Jod an email from Ken that I had printed out, admitting that I had taken it from a computer without permission. It was unclear whether the evidence could be legally used, but it did show some indication of their plans. I mentioned the term conspiracy, which I was unsure of its exact legal meaning. I expressed my confusion and fear about protecting myself and my daughters without the means to hire a lawyer. Jod leaned back, contemplating, then asked if I could return the next morning. I agreed, and we exchanged smiles. I saw Jod in a new light. Beyond her goth past, I saw her as a woman facing the possibility of divorce and uncertain finances. I randomly chose a lawyer from the phone book. I paid in advance for a comprehensive service package, determined to avoid any potential uncertainty. I instructed my lawyer to facilitate the divorce as expeditiously and straightforwardly as possible, allowing Janet to retain the house, given that its value had declined below the outstanding mortgage. My primary objective was to secure joint custody of our daughters, with the aim of achieving full custody if possible. I consented to pay child support, but declined to provide alimony. Billy called, requesting accommodation, and I promptly offered my assistance. We met at Taco Bell for lunch, where he greeted me with an unusual smile. I was curious to know more, so I asked him what was going on. He informed me that a hospital employee had updated him about Calvin. Sarah had visited Calvin at the hospital, but Calvin's unaware wife and kids showed up, causing a scene that led to Sarah being escorted out by security. Billy also mentioned that Sarah had resigned from her position and was presumably at home, though her current whereabouts and the reason for Calvin's family's absence were unclear. Billy was no longer concerned with the specifics of the situation. He took a week off to address his personal affairs and, although my mother was staying with us, we assumed we could manage Calvin's sleeping arrangements. He had planned to collect his belongings from his place in order to avoid Sarah. My next stop was supposed to be the insurance agent, but another call interrupted me. It was Cameron Wilcox, who asked me to come over and help settle things as Janet was distressed and her mother's presence was not helpful. I inquired as to who would be there, and Cameron replied that it would be the three of us, along with Janet's sister Carla. I was unsure of his expectations, but I agreed to arrive in 20 minutes. The mood was heavy when I got there, and I brought along my full set of evidence while refusing any coffee offered. I initiated this discussion by asking Cameron to explain Janet's perspective. Janet felt that I had overreacted by accusing her of anger and forcing her to confess to things that were not true in order to appease me. She insisted that she had done nothing wrong and that I had no grounds to kick her out. It was evident that Janet had given her parents a very clean account of our issues. I provided a detailed account of the issues between us. It was understandable that she might not wish to confess her affair to her parents, but I was frustrated that she was placing the blame on me. What could I have done differently? I was not expecting Cameron to expose her lies or confess to errors. I was simply looking for clarity. I was simply attempting to ascertain the facts. He responded by stating that Janet had denied having a boyfriend and that any meetings were innocent. I had previously misinterpreted these gatherings as being something more sinister. In the past month, Janet had made over 80 calls to this individual. I inquired of my friend how often she had been contacted by Janet or her mother during this period. Their gazes shifted to Janet, who did not meet their eyes. This behavior led me to question whether this was merely a casual friendship. I then proceeded to challenge Janet by pulling out her phone. "Carla, could you read this text that I had sent right after I confronted her?" I handed her the phone, which was. Janet sent a message to Ken expressing regret. Carla returned the phone without comment. "Does this seem casual to you?" There was silence a few weeks ago. Janet and Sarah claimed they were shopping at the King of Prussia Mall. The girls wanted to join, but were told it was adults only. Here are some photos from that day. I showed Cameron 6 pictures, none of which matched their supposed location. Everyone looked troubled, especially as it was clear the images didn't align with Janet's story. "That looks like Noble's Grove, not the King of Prussia Mall," Martha pointed out. Until this point, Janet had been relatively reserved in her interactions with others, particularly in the context of photographs. However, in the images presented, she appeared to be closely attached to the man in question. This behavior was incongruous with her typical demeanor when in the company of friends. It was evident that Ken held a more intimate position in her life than that of a mere acquaintance. Janet's emotional response to the photographs, which included tears, indicated that she was taken aback by the images. To illustrate this point further, I proceeded to show her a few more photographs. The photographs were taken at Olive Garden and Red Lobster, both of which are appropriate locations. However, the nature of the images suggests a level of intimacy that is not appropriate for a casual social gathering. Cameron expressed visible disappointment at the deceit and apologized for involving me in the situation as he left. Janet exited the room in tears. We did not discuss the issue of her underwear. It was subsequently deemed unnecessary. Cameron offered an apology at the door, expressing regret for the events that had transpired but reassuring me that they would not be overlooked upon my return home. I discovered that my mother and Billy had arranged a provisional sleeping arrangement for him in the modest room where I keep my computer. Billy had brought with him a pile of his belongings. He retrieved his clothes from his house, noting that Sarah was not present when he stopped by. The most notable item at home was a piece of mail for Janet from the passport office. Despite knowing that I should not have done so, I was overcome by curiosity and opened it to find a family passport featuring Janet and our daughters. I had not previously considered that a photo session might be taking place, but the girls had mentioned it. I telephoned Cameron to inform him that Janet's passport had arrived. I instructed him to inform Janet that she could collect it from my house if she sent Ken to collect it, as I would only normally hand it over to him in person. I would have been at work and unaware of the mail, but I happened to be home that day. Cameron mentioned that they had asked Janet to move out and did not know where she would go, indicating that they were quite upset with her. He agreed to pass on the message about the passport dinner, which was lively and mainly focused on the twins. A lady from Family Services visited us at school today. Bethany shared with a hint of mischief, and I asked for details. I learned that they had spoken with Jody, a caseworker who also attended our high school. The female participants in the study teased me for playing dumb about my acquaintance with Judd. They shared that she spent over an hour talking about me, which they interpreted as her having a fondness for me. Our meal was interrupted by a call from Carla, who invited me to meet at McDonald's over hot coffees. She attempted to relay Janet's side of things. She admitted upfront that her explanation might be lacking, given that Janet's story seemed convoluted to her. I pointed out that it sounded like she was preparing to offer excuses rather than answers. Carla acknowledged this. My initial skepticism prompted me to adopt a more passive approach, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. Carla started by stating that Janet attributed all the blame to Sarah, according to her. Sarah's affair with Billy appeared to be a thrilling and romantic experience, something that Janet felt she had missed out on, having only known stability and love with me, in contrast to her relationship with Ken Sanders and Gilbert. During these outings, Sarah encouraged Janet to go out with them for drinks and meals. Sarah and Calvin often snuck away together, leaving Janet and Ken by themselves. This led to Janet and Ken starting their own affair, which quickly escalated. Janet found herself swept up by Ken's adventurous stories and ambitions, eagerly agreeing to move to Spain with him. However, she struggled with the idea of leaving the twins, knowing that I would not let her take them abroad. She even considered trying to portray me as an unfit father. Janet now recognizes her mistake, especially after realizing that the girls were more attached to me. She is now willing to agree to a divorce without complications would ensue should she attempt to take the twins. Carla mentioned that Sarah returned to her parents' home, prompting Billy to move back to his place temporarily with plans to sell or rent it. He spent his morning sorting out financial and legal affairs, including a visit to Gilbert to seek compensation. However, their lack of a fraternization policy made it a challenging case. Finally, Billy discovered that Calvin was being discharged from the hospital, running into his wife, who was handling the paperwork. Before Billy could leave, Calvin's wife approached him to explain her efforts to have Calvin dropped from the charges against Billy. She even thanked Billy, surprising him by sharing her long-term, successful attempts to help Calvin change after Billy left. I ended up sitting on the front porch, drinking beer. My mother joined me with a meatloaf sandwich and a beer of her own, staying silent but keeping me company. She mentioned that my father would be coming over for dinner and staying the night when Judd Mitchell arrived. My mother arrived and I went inside. Judd sat with me, but he did not take the beer I offered. After a brief period of silence, he revealed that he had just served Janet the papers, which described Janet as extremely upset and set, and that she was currently staying with her sister. I finished my beer, and I wondered aloud why I felt so terrible about everything. Judd replied that in situations like these, there is no real win, just scenarios that are less terrible. I considered another beer, but I decided against it. I asked Judd if he could talk to the twins about the situation. I was concerned that my comments might be perceived as negative towards their mother, which might result in a deterioration of our relationship. Judd agreed to visit at 7 that evening to discuss the matter with them. As she left, she paused and looked back, sharing a smile with me, which I interpreted as a positive sign. Judd spent a significant amount of time with Beth and Britt, explaining things in a gentle manner. Meanwhile, Billy and I worked on clearing out his house of any items related to Sarah. After that, Judd began visiting several times a week. Judd became a regular presence in our lives, spending approximately the same amount of time with my mother as he did with my daughters. I observed that he was somewhat less inclined to interact with me, although I was not concerned. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, he came to sit by me. Before I could respond, he inquired about my wine preferences. I informed him that I only drank wines with screw tops, not corks, which he found amusing. He requested a red wine, which was more of a jug than a bottle, but he did not seem to mind. I finally broached the subject of her visits, wondering how much longer she would need to see the twins. She clarified that she was not really there for the twins, but to see me, which was confusing, given that she barely spoke to me during her visits. I thought she was keeping her distance on purpose. She then laughed off my concern about fraternization policies, before playfully suggesting that I should ask to see her tattoos. I inquired about them, and she teased that finding them would be more fun, especially with a bit more. We both laughed as I topped off our glasses, searching for the tattoos. It proved to be an exhilarating experience, given that we had to remain silent to avoid waking up the girls. The fourth tattoo was concealed in a particularly intimate area, which I took my time appreciating. However, she eventually signaled that she had had enough and gently pushed me away. She left early before the twins woke up, but I was unable to shake the feeling that they somehow knew what was going on. I instructed the lawyer I found in the phone book to finalize the divorce papers and send them. Janet was presented with two options: accept my terms or assume responsibility for the situation independently. At the time, she was residing with Carla, but I did not receive any communication from her. Over the course of several weeks, I did not receive any response, not even a phone call. My father's declining health resulted in my mother spending more time with him than at my house. With the conclusion of the school year, the twins remained with her over the summer. This period concluded with my father's relocation to an assisted living facility. Billy and I assisted my mother in preparing our family home for sale. Following this, throughout the summer, Judd resided with me. She frequently visited the girls at my mother's residence and spent several nights a week at my place. The girls enjoyed outings and meals with her, and I was pleased that they were receiving so much attention. I was no longer envious, as it was evident that they understood the situation between Judd and me. Janet made only brief calls to the twins, and these calls were often forced and lacked sincerity. The twins did not inform me of these calls. Billy finalized his divorce from Sarah, but I was uncertain about the status of my own divorce. Billy was attempting to establish a surveying business and sought my collaboration as a partner, but I lacked the necessary financial resources until my mother intervened and provided assistance after recognizing that Medicare would eventually cover my father's expenses. My mother suggested utilizing their savings to invest in the new business, which Billy and I were initiating. She viewed this as not merely a gesture of assistance but also as an investment in our future. Within 3 months, Billy and I had established our surveying business. The drafting skills that Janet had acquired proved useful for creating plot drawings when school resumed. Janet unexpectedly met with the twins instead of them seeing her at the guidance office, which disappointed them despite their best efforts to remain polite. Their meeting with Janet was strained, and she expressed her love and regret over how things had turned out. She mentioned her plans to visit Spain and promised to send them postcards on their birthdays and Christmas gifts. The girls were upset when she left, and Janet did not inform me about her departure. However, her parents visited the following week to apologize for her actions without making excuses. They expressed a desire to remain in the twins' lives, which I was open to. Carlo found himself caught between his sister and her parents and felt too ashamed to face me. My divorce was finalized 2 months later, and I and Judd celebrated by going out for a rare dinner at Red Lobster, leaving the twins at home. They seemed okay with it, perhaps even happy for us. We ended up staying overnight at the local Holiday Inn when I returned home at 10 o'clock. At 10 p.m., the twins displayed visible excitement. Despite their reticence, they spent the entire day with huge smiles. A year into running our business, my father passed away. My mother considered relocating to Florida to be with her sister but was dissuaded by the twins. The girls endorsed the idea of their grandmother's relocation, suggesting that Jod could assume her duties despite lacking the requisite expertise. In the kitchen, they also mentioned that they were ready for separate bedrooms, which demonstrated clear forward planning. The girls received birthday cards from their mother, but no phone call. Along with these, they received numerous postcards featuring Spanish windmills, the significance of which was unclear to me. For Christmas, they received beautiful embroidered dresses that were too small thanks to a growth spurt, but they did not seem to mind. Gilbert engineering also turned out to be a significant factor in the lives of the twins. Billy derived some consolation from the knowledge that Calvin had opted for a career change, taking up a teaching position at a local vocational school, a role that represented a slight decline from his previous position. Meanwhile, Sarah had remarried and relocated to California. Kin Sanders did not remain long in his new position overseas and returned to the United States, although his current whereabouts were uncertain. Billy even attempted to reconnect with his high school alumni. I attempted to locate him through my professional network. My best friend expressed concern that I was being too lenient with Ken. Interestingly, the twins continued to receive postcards featuring windmills, but the messages were always vague with no real updates. Cameron mentioned that Janet had called a few times, now working at a travel agency in Barcelona, but she did not bring up Kin or explain what had happened between them. Jod and I eloped to Maryland for a low. In the subsequent year, we were anticipating the arrival of a child, which delighted Brittany and Bethany. They joked about having a younger sister who would adhere to a goth lifestyle, a private joke they shared with Jod but did not divulge to me.